Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you want to be on mute for now, I will unmute you one by one for introductions. But if you want to share your screen, we'd love to see your beautiful faces. For those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Celeste. I am the Director of People Ops at Open House Austin, and I was formerly the events manager, so I've kind of had my hand in all of the open house events for the last year. We're really excited for tonight's event. Lauren is a new addition to our group and has graciously offered to speak about share her experience with public transportation. And a lot of this info is obviously Austin based, but we know we've got people coming kind of from all over. So hopefully a lot of it is useful in general and just kind of interesting. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. So I will go ahead and get started. We'll go do some introductions. I'll just kind of unmute you guys one by one if you want to share your name, the city where you live in or invest in, and then also what is your favorite thing to do when you take public transportation. So for instance, I am a napper. I will take a nap, or I will try and small talk strangers because I love to meet new people. So those are my two favorite activities, but interested to hear what y'all have to say. And then we'll go through introductions, and I'll pass off to Lauren, who's got a presentation for us, and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. If you want to use the chat box while we're talking, if she says something that you have a question about on that slide, please feel free to type it in so everyone can see it, and she'll kind of answer as we go. And then we'll have that time at the end as well to kind of go over everything. Yeah, all right, well, I will get started. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Emily. I'm based in Austin, and I get my real estate investment portfolio is one building right now where I am. It's my primary residence. I hope to get an investment property at some point, but I'm just really excited. I love urban planning and thinking about my city, and I studied anthropology, so just fascinated by how people exist in public space. So that's why I'm here tonight. And my favorite thing to do on public transportation, I love to people watch as much as possible. I like to, I don't know, just see who else is out there, what they're doing, kind of imagine stories about them if I don't end up talking to them. So always observing.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we're so glad you're here. Let's see, Jen Rampola, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I live in Austin. I'm on the east side, and so that's where we live, own our home, looking to invest also within our same neighborhood. So 78702. Love this neighborhood. And my favorite thing, it's been a while since I've taken public transportation, but it would be kind of same with Emily, people watching, but also listening to music, or probably nowadays it would be a podcast.
Awesome. That's so good. Okay. Kathleen Kerner, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Kathleen. I am also in East Austin. I don't have any investments yet. My boyfriend actually owns the house that we live in currently, but I would like to have investments of my own at some point because I actually am also a realtor here in Austin. A new realtor, I should specify. So I would like to invest. My favorite thing to do when on public transportation, I would also have to say people watching, really in any public setting, people watching. It's just a great time.
Yes, definitely. Now I'm thinking about it, like that's something I miss about, like that we've missed out on the pandemic, is like just
Exactly.
But people watching has been much more limited. Brianna.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I live in Austin, but I don't own any real estate here yet, but I'm hoping to change that this year. I'm working on changing it, I should say. I do own an investment property that I used to live in Orlando, Florida, where I'm from. And I also used to live in New York where I took public transit very regularly. And I have to say, Celeste, both those things you named are like such no-nos. Like, don't fall asleep. Who knows where you'll end up? And don't talk to people. No, that was a big no-no. But back in the day, I used to read New York Magazine. Oh, sorry, my puppy really wants the treats I have in my hand. That was my like favorite way to spend my commute, was reading that magazine. Now I would listen to podcasts, and that's what I do when I'm on public transit.
Dang, that's fair. You can tell I've like not lived in a larger city than Austin. Oh, perfect. Christine, welcome. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello. I'm Christine. I live on MLK in 183 in Austin. My husband and I own our house. Yeah. Hey, girl. We just bought it in May. And my favorite thing about public transportation is everything. I think it's amazing to be able to get around without a car. My husband and I share a car, so it's very valuable to us.
Perfect. I'm so glad you're here. Let's go to Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane. I live in Round Rock, Texas. I own my home here. Excuse me. Yeah, and I'm really excited about this talk. I work in the DV field, and so accessibility is really important and such a big part of social justice and also understanding investing. So I'm excited for this talk today. Personally, on public transportation, I love it. We don't get to do it enough in Round Rock and Austin. There's not as many opportunities, but reading, I like to read.
Cool, very cool. Let's go to Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan, and I recently moved to Austin from Brooklyn in September of last year. And my husband and I just bought our first house. We're in Crestview, 78757. It was our goal moving from Brooklyn, where real estate is not attainable for the common folk. So we made our way here. He's a UT grad. I grew up in Texas. It's just been, a decade since I've lived here. So it's definitely been a change for me. I have yet to take public transit here in Austin. I will be excited to do so and try it out once things are a little more normal. But my husband and I also share a car. But we bought in February and moved into our house in May during the pandemic. So it's been quite an experience, and interested to see what transportation is going to be like here, what the plans are. Obviously not expecting to be as robust as New York, but I think it'll be interesting to kind of see what's happening here and see how the city's growing.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. We're excited to have you back in Texas. Shayla, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Shayla. I'm in East Austin at 183 and East MLK as well. I own this house that I live in now, and I have one investment property in Cedar Park. And my public transportation has been limited, but I really enjoy looking at like whether it's buildings or businesses or whatever, to see what things I may have missed or may not have recognized. Just driving, you kind of bypass some of that. So that's what I like to do.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're here. Last but not least, we'll go to Jen from Open House.
Hey guys. Yeah, like Celeste said, my name is Jen. I'm one of the agents at Open House. Right now I'm living in the Wooten neighborhood, so in 78757. I have two investment properties. So I have one that I have a long-term renter in North Central Austin in 78753. And then I have one in Lockhart, a flip I just finished that we are hopefully going to be putting on the market very soon. Favorite thing to do when taking public transportation. So I have never taken public transportation in Austin. I think I maybe have done the UT bus a couple times 10 years ago. But when I lived in Seattle, I took it very frequently. It's awesome there. I actually got to ride for free. And I think I was probably on Instagram then, but I'd probably be listening to podcasts now. So that's what I do in my car, listening to the Office Ladies podcast.
That's perfect. Well, we're glad you're here. All right. I think that was everyone. So I will give you guys a quick intro on Lauren. We're so excited she's here. She is a pretty new to Austin. She's been here for less than 2 years. She moved here from San Francisco. She works at a leading national transportation planning firm, and they just opened their newest office in Austin to better serve the growing need of Texas cities. She's a city planner by training, and got a lot of experience in mobility planning, and former manager of the parking policy and technology in San Francisco, and she helped launch the SF Park project. And she's got a passion for better transportation options because it impacts everything: our health, our money, our climate, all of it. So I will pass it off to her. She is going to share her screen and we'll get started.
Great. Hey, everybody. It'll just take me a minute to get the screen. I'm zoomed out for the day, so you know how it goes. Okay, so let me make this bigger. How is that for you? Is that better? Great. I think I have the full screen now. Let me know if not, and I can adjust. Okay, I think it's okay. Somebody wave me down if not. So yeah, it's great to be here. I just learned about this cohort just a few months ago, and when I was feverishly Googling things for my own housing search. And so kind of a new member of this cohort, and as Celeste said, I'm a transportation planner. I don't work for the city. I don't represent these projects that we're going to talk about today, and have kind of the full project manager level detail, but I am tangential to a lot of them. I do a lot of work that sits around them, so I have a decent inside scoop on how it all fits together. So today we're gonna kind of go through a little bit of a presentation. I'm just gonna give an overview on what are all the moving pieces affecting Austin's transportation future. And then if we want to at the end, we can kind of zoom into the Project Connect future transit map if you want to, and kind of look through the different lines to see like how close the nearest transit stop will be to your house and that kind of thing. So to give you a little bit of an idea of who I am, as Celeste said, I'm a city planner by training, but I kind of got into this stuff as a kid. I grew up kind of on the crosshairs of a super segregated Midwest city in Omaha, and had this weirdly unique experience of like seeing both like sides of town and how, you know, basically what investment or a lack of investment looked like. And honestly sort of always had this pretty unique childhood experience of thinking, what are all the grown-ups doing? We're just going to give up on cities and neighborhoods and not care about certain parts of the population. So I thought that was a pretty rare, like, early city planning experience. And then when I got to college, took a bunch of sustainability and climate change classes, and I thought that was super compelling. And then the land use parts of that I thought were most interesting because they were like all around us. In Austin, in any city we've ever lived, there are constantly decisions being made about what land use can go where and all that good stuff. And so I thought it was just a really like practical way to be helpful, basically. So went immediately, so I learned that city planning was a career. I went immediately to grad school and I became a city planner and urban designer. And then oops, I'm saying a chat, let me just make sure. Oh, okay. Let me just see here if I can flip this to a better version for y'all or get rid of these notes. Just a sec. I have a PDF here, so we'll use that. Okay. Just a sec, y'all. Okay, hopefully you can see that a little bit more clear. Should take up more of the screen now.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Now I'm totally blanking on how to make this full screen, but we will just get through it. And apparently I'm getting worse at technology the longer the pandemic goes on. So anywho, became a city planner and urban designer and then entered that field, and pretty much within a year realized that transportation was even more interesting because people were making real projects, delivering real projects every day. And it basically just moved at a faster pace. And that sounds a little crazy because a lot of times when we're talking about transit plans, it takes, you know, decades, but relative to a lot of things we can do in the world, it gets things done. And then over the last few years, I kind of had my own personal finance journey, you know, got my financial act together. I was really kind of coming from zero on a financial education starting point. And so I've been like, you know, become a bit of a personal finance nerd. I am the person who has figured out how to optimize everything. And then I'm like my friend's go-to person for all investment decisions or when I've seen the inside of all of their 401ks. I am constantly like, you know, giving them advice when the market drops and telling them what to do. So I've kind of basically caught up the last few years on that front, and that leads me to my own kind of real estate entrance as I recently was, last time I was on this call, I was looking for a house and I bought one. It's on the right. I haven't moved in yet. I close in 2 weeks. But anyway, as I was entering the real estate market and looking for a primary residence, but one that would potentially be a good real estate investment, I had to apply all of my like city planning and transportation chops to try to get there. So it's sort of an interesting application, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So those are kind of the different lenses that I bring to the conversation around what's going on with transportation in Austin, and then how will it affect the real estate market. Okay, so just to give you a quick preview, as I said, there's a lot on the docket in 2020. A lot of these conversations proceed or will extend beyond, but here are the kind of moving pieces that could really shape our city. First of all, a comprehensive transit plan has been approved by City Council and is going to the ballot in November for funding, and we'll talk a lot about that. That's a big one for our conversation today. And then also of equal import is the land code rewrite. I'm sure a lot of you have followed kind of the Code Next drama in the past and then seen that the land code revision conversation has been back on the table the last few years. It's currently stalled out with a lawsuit, but we're going to talk about what it means if it comes back a little bit as well, because that's a huge piece of the puzzle and really relates to transit. As part of the land code rewrite, it includes a lot of language and changes about parking, which is, as Celeste said, one of my favorite topics, believe it or not. Really know how to like turn on the sex appeal at a cocktail party when you start talking about parking requirements, but I think it's super interesting. And then A little bit less relevant for this group, I also just wanted to flag some other changes occurring that really affect large development, so maybe not our scale, but all of these things rolled up on the screen here represent some really big chess piece moves for the city and how we can get around. And so I think this came through in the intros that you all did. We all care about this for about a million different reasons. You know, kind of most importantly, as a resident, I think everyone here has experienced our some of our traffic challenges. Growth is only going to speed up. And so you can imagine like doubling our population on our current infrastructure. We've all kind of gotten a reprieve from congestion with COVID, but it will be back and it will be better than ever or worse than ever. And I think everyone here has some fluency with what that means for our health, our asthma rates, our own physical health, and just the opportunity to get around occasionally some other ways. As a personal finance nerd, I am keenly aware that transportation is the biggest household expense after housing. So if you think about issues around equity in Austin and ways to make it, to try to keep things more affordable, not having to own a multi-$1,000 asset to be able to access jobs and things like that, that's a pretty huge consideration that we sometimes don't talk about enough. And to that point, that drives a lot of economic opportunity. There are some studies in my field that try to measure that, and the correlations are astounding. There are, quite frankly, a lot of people in this country who would love to have a job and work and literally can't get there. So these things are all super related. And then transportation is a dominant greenhouse gas emission. I think here in Austin, the last climate plan, I want to say it was in the 30 or 38 or 40% perhaps. I could have that number wrong, but it's a really big slice of the pie when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, and including here in Austin. And then what we're going to talk about as well, of course, is what it means for the real estate market. It changes the real estate market a lot. I don't think any of us have a crystal ball to know how, but between kind of looking through the map together today and then hearing all of your experiences, I think it should become a little bit more clear for all of us. So these are the things we're going to talk about. So I think it's important to just start off with the whale in the room, Project Connect. This is incredibly exciting. Austin has put its first comprehensive transit plan through council and on the ballot. There have been a couple of other attempts to do smaller versions of this in the past. I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, that were really focused more on 1 or 2 lines. This version is aiming to really try to be a citywide service. As we learned with the red line, which I'm sure a lot of you have taken, it doesn't work particularly well to just do 1 line at a time. We really need to connect all of these things. It really takes a system. So this has been a crazy effort. A lot of my friends in the field have been working crazy hours for a few years now to get to this point and to select what's going to be in the package. Just the amount of effort is crazy. And of course, just as they're getting all these plans together, here comes COVID. So it, you know, kind of caused some moments of questioning what we can put on the ballot when, what they can put on the ballot when. But it is officially going forward, and we'll talk about exactly what'll be on the ballot. So there's a broad, like, system-wide Project Connect plan, and then they narrowed it down to an initial investment, and that's the map here on this slide. It's a little hard to see in this format, but later on during discussion, I think we can share a really sharp PDF and kind of like take a tour through what are probably the more relevant lines for this group based on where everyone lives and which lines are most impactful. It's narrowed down to 2 new light rail lines for the initial investment. It includes a transit tunnel downtown. A lot of these purple line investments are rapid bus improvements, and then there are some new bus lines as well. And although it's still kind of at the zoomed out level, I'll just share that, like, if you're focusing on anything, I would probably glance at this orange line, which is the orange line, future orange line, and see where that goes. And then I would glance at the blue line here that goes to the airport. These are the 2 new light rail lines that are in the initial investment plan, and there are other light rail lines planned as well that we can talk about. So this is a huge deal that the city has gotten to this point. As a city planner, I work across the country in a lot of different cities, and you see this a lot where a city basically gets behind its growth curve. It thinks, oh, I can keep doing things the same way, like we've always driven here. It's just part of our culture. And I appreciate, local culture, but the reality is that as a region grows, you kind of can't keep doing things only the same way. Just the math doesn't work out geometrically. And so I wouldn't say that this is Austin's last chance, but we have lost a lot of time kind of arguing over specific lines in the back, or in the past. So it will be, I think it's going to be a really big challenge for regional planning and growth if this doesn't pass. I'll be pretty nervous. Great, so I wanted to just reemphasize that this is on the ballot in November. It includes a funding package toward the initial investment. Council has already approved kind of the overall package and what the system should look like. And as I said, COVID really threw a wrench in some of these plans. So they did slightly shrink the initial investment by a little bit more than they wanted to. So I think they initially wanted to spend $10 billion on the first round, and they have now shortened it to $7 billion. They basically did this whole process really carefully to try to meet all federal guidelines to give themselves like the best possible chance to get as much possible covered by the federal government, which does often fund capital transit improvements. So what's on the ballot is an increase to cover 3.8 billion of the overall 7.1 billion. That is the initial investment. So that equates out to 8.75 cents per $100 of property value to fund specifically the transit system that you saw on the previous page. And that covers, like I said, the 2 light rail lines, not all of them, but all the ones that were on that map. And then it really emphasizes north-south connections, which, as we know, trying to get around the city are the most challenging. Another big decision about like the price tag and what to include and where was around tunneling and like what to do downtown. So they did end up deciding that even though it's expensive, that they couldn't really find a better way around doing a tunnel downtown to be able to speed up the segments that are dealing with the most congested area. All right, so the big question for this group is how might it interact with real estate markets? And I think you all will probably have some really good experiences to bring to the table during conversation after this. I'm really excited to hear what you all think. I will share, like, as a planner who looks at other cities who have built light rail and similar systems, the data is pretty undeniable that access to mass transit does increase residential sales values, and that is pretty much always the case. It almost always increases office prices as well, but that's a little bit less consistent in the data. And when people are making these kinds of conclusions or studying what the impact is, they typically think about it as about a half mile as like kind of the shed in either direction from the transit line, or really the transit stations, around who will be most impacted. So if you kind of look at the blue and orange lines that I showed you on the map earlier, and then imagine like a half-mile buffer, those areas are going to be pretty different in a few years. And light rail in particular tends to be a lot more impactful on values than the rapid bus. So that's why I keep referencing the orange line and the blue line, because those are the two light rail that are first on the docket. And Austin City Council is really aware of this and really, really worried about it. So this package that got approved by council also included $300 million for anti-displacement and affordable housing programs, which is great because you know, everyone wants to build new transit. We need to make it like more affordable to get around, but if it results in speeding up some pretty dark gentrification trends already, it kind of defeats some of the purpose. So they're really eager to kind of mitigate that the best that they can. And the other thing to know about how it'll impact real estate markets is that transit needs a lot of density to support it. A classic mistake I see in cities that I work in is you'll have like a single family neighborhood that says, like, I want the bus route to come right to me, but if you look at the math on the back end, it just doesn't support providing enough riders to make it worthwhile. So that'll really dovetail with a conversation we'll have in a second about the land code and that rewrite, because you can see pretty clearly that they need to be connected to work. And although the land code is sort of stalled out for now, if Project Connect passes in November and is funded, it'll kind of make it a non-starter to not update land code around stations in particular. We really have to track transportation and land use together. So that'll be a huge focus. So with all of this going on, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of the background around what's driving it and what the sort of behind the scenes playbook is. A couple of years ago, or actually in 2019, Austin adapted a strategic mobility plan. And this is more something that you don't hear a lot in like sort of normal day-to-day conversation, but on the city side, on the planner side, this document's actually really, really powerful, and it's helping to shape a lot of our mobility future. All of the projects I work on that touch anything the city does point back to this, and it's given them license to really try to upgrade a lot of our elements of our transportation system. And it's really ambitious. So it's trying to get from today's mode split, which is shown here on the left, of 74% of people getting to work by driving alone, down to 50% by 2039. So when we talk about Project Connect and some of the land code rewrite, you'll often hear people refer back to the strategic mobility plan. So, you know, it's not like the city needs everybody to have exactly the same travel patterns, but they need to make a really sharp dent in it to stay aligned with their goals. So that 74 to 50% are numbers that a lot of my work ends up pegging to. And the 2039 year or 2040 are figures and benchmarks that I hear a lot around Austin planning, and that's because that's when they expect the population to double from where it is today. So we're at 2 million today, so it'd be another 2 million. And that is pretty scary from a growth perspective to be able to keep up with. That's incredibly fast. And it's on infrastructure that's really not quite ready for it, as you all have seen. So we talked a little bit about this. We're not going to focus on it a ton, but I just wanted to flag again that the potential land code development revision is in the background. It's on hiatus. a lot of you probably have seen like the no code next signs, usually against, a couple for. And so as you've probably tracked that, yes, there was kind of a citywide code rewrite proposed in the past. It was very political. It got stalled in city government, went on hiatus for a little while, and staff went back to try to like do it differently and pay more attention to things like gentrification and then the transition zones around like high density corridors. And then they came out with something, I want to say about a year ago or maybe 9 months ago, they came out with, here's the new version. They stopped using the word code next as it had become a little bit toxic, and basically built on what they had done, but also started some parts over. So that was moving along pretty quickly this spring. And it actually impacted a lot of work that I do. And then you may have seen in the news a few months ago, it got stalled out again, this time by a lawsuit, alleging that they didn't do, because it's citywide zoning, they need to do like door-to-door outreach to everyone in the city, something like that. So it's currently, you know, being sorted out by lawyers, but I will say I do not see that conversation dying down because our current land use code is so out of whack with our future growth. So I think it will come back. If I don't really have any like definite intel on this, but if I were the city of Austin, I would wait until after November to see what happened with Project Connect, because A, we just need to stay focused on like one conversation at a time, I think, and then B, they need to, you know, work through all the litigation that they've been hit with, and then C, you know, how compelling or how quickly this needs to happen will be shaped by how much transit is approved, and well, if transit's approved. And then I also wanted to highlight some of the parking reforms on the table. Those are really nested in the land code revisions, but they're also sprinkled into a few other policies that are coming to play. And I think these are really interesting. I'm curious to hear from you all about how you feel about the parking reform side, because I know it impacts kind of what we can do with our properties quite a bit as well. But the general gist behind the parking reform conversation is that cities, including Austin, have always had, not always, but since, you know, cars became super popular, have parking minimums in their planning code that say you are required to keep 2 spaces. You know, it varies a little bit, and I'm sure you all have wrestled with these on your properties. And these are really interesting conversations because although it's like free for me to say, if I were the Queen of Austin, to say, I want you all to provide a lot of parking, it'll make it easier to park, it'll be free to park, it'll be great. But then you all, if you were developing a property from scratch, are suddenly donating like a pretty big chunk of your area to parking, and you don't have a choice, and you have to give it away for free. So that kind of ends up inflating parking demand at other areas because everyone sort of gets used to that, and if you drive on one end, you need to drive on the other end. So these requirements kind of stack up, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, there's free parking everywhere. Everyone's just going to drive. It's pretty no-brainer for folks. And you get into this like never-ending spiral of there's never enough, there's never enough. So it's really tricky to find alternatives to that. But it's like one of those weirdly important, boring topics that I am super passionate about for exactly that reason. So the City of Austin and that strategic mobility plan I showed you are also really into parking reform. So as part of the land code revisions, pretty much across the board, parking minimums are all getting relaxed, and in some cases going away. Downtown is treated very differently, And that's all still very much like under revision and may adjust. But I think you can just picture that there would be a general loosening of parking requirements across all land use types, not just the residential properties that a lot of us are really focused on. So that's a really big piece of the puzzle. As a transportation planner, who's often kind of getting asked, well, like, what'll move the needle? What'll help us reduce climate impacts? What will inspire people to try transit for the first time when it exists? And parking is the answer. It is one of the most high impact things that affects our behavior and how we choose to get around. Like, how much is there? Is it free? It shapes a lot of our behavior more than we realize. So I thought I would just share a little bit about like how all of these different lenses affected my recent property search, to get a little bit of a glimpse into how I applied it. And it's totally, you know, personal. I think the big lesson here is it's really hard to get exactly what you want. But hopefully by sharing my personal lens and path, it may like stir a little bit of overlap with what you all are looking at. So I thought, as I was looking to my house, you know, I know where the transit lines are going to be. Like, I know like what the code is going to be. I'll be able to optimize and find the perfect thing. Initially, I was really going to prioritize Crestview area because, as you can see in the future transit map, 2 of the new light rail stations overlap there, the orange and the blue, and the red line, which exists but is very limited, is going to be improved and also crosses there. So that to me was like a pretty prime spot. I was looking for a large lot, potentially that could later be divided if I wanted to do that. I liked the sound of self-developer a lot, like it just sounded strong. I was looking for a lot that had some flexibility in its layout, that had a lot of pivots. I know, I know you all talk about like how nice it is to have a lot of pivots. I agree. And then I really wanted there to be an ADU or room for one. So that was like my wish list. And then the realities of kind of the Austin housing market and what's available and what was like a reasonable price really hit. And so I ended up with something slightly different than what I had planned. Oh, I also wanted to add that I was starting to look down here too, where the future orange line will be. But I did have to nix that because I didn't say this yet. I try not to own a car if I can. And so I found this to be untenably unwalkable south of the interstate down here. So I kind of had to nix that. I currently live here in Bolden Creek, and the house I bought ended up being in North Shoal Creek. So not near Crestview Station, but pretty close. You know, a short bike ride, a long walk. And so as it is with anything, you know, you're kind of comparing what you want, but other things start to shake out differently. I had trouble finding homes that I thought were the right price in Crestview relative to the work that needed to get done on them. And so I kind of slowly started looking in like Wooten, where somebody lives on the call. And then I saw something pop up in North Shoal Creek that I really liked. So I ended up kind of favoring more like short-term or mid-term value and potential over like the long-term, which would have been like buying up anything I could right next to stations. And I think that's okay. It's nothing is really an exact science. And what I really liked about this house right here is that it was close to so many different things I could walk to. It was close to the Rapid Bus on Burnett, which can get me to and from downtown whenever I can go back downtown again. And then the bike path was a huge attractor as well. And then I ended up going for extra bedrooms. There were 4 bedrooms in this house. So I thought, okay, I can't like build a lot of structures in the backyard, but I can rent rooms. And then there was this pretty big garage that currently cannot be used as a rental, but if the code rewrite passes that I talked about, I could convert this into an ADU. So I didn't exactly end up going where I thought I would, but I'm happy with where it ended up. In terms of like, did I really maximize the transit investments happening? I would have liked to have been close to Crestview so I could hop on light rail and then, you know, have control over a lot. I love the idea of adding density to a lot near transit in the future, and just having those other options pop up for what I could do with the property in the very long term. But Austin, Central Austin is also pretty small. And so I'm kind of just thinking that the overall network effect of all these things happening and access getting better everywhere will have a pretty big impact on my property as well. And then being close to a rapid transit line was a huge deal for me. It's currently, you know, a pretty frequent bus line. And then it is slated for some improvements that would make it even more frequent and faster. And that's part of the initial investment package. So I didn't follow all of my own advice, but I did follow some of it. Now, back to my favorite topic of parking. So I think it's interesting. I told you all that I don't own a car. I just keep putting it off for the last like 11 years, seeing how long I can do that. And since then, I've lived in San Francisco, New York City, and LA is actually where I was most recently, and then in Austin for the last couple of years, less than 2 years. And I like it. It makes me walk more. It's like a challenge, but I think in a good way for me. I have a super flexible life, so I can kind of get away with restricting myself a little bit on that front. And then I rent cars a lot off of Turo for road trips. So it's sort of amusing to me that here I am. I don't need to park any cars on my property, and there is on-street parking for visitors and when I rent a car or if I do buy a car in the future. But it's sort of interesting to me that my garage, this is my floor plan, takes up 21% of the floor area of my house. That's a lot for something that I don't really need or care about. And if I were to do the math on that, let's say I took like the land value of my property and then looked at the 21%, it's a little bit of dead space. So I just think it's kind of interesting from like a parking reform conversation and like getting into the issue of should parking requirements exist or how much parking should be required. I just think this firsthand math is sort of amusing. And then the driveway itself, I think, takes up about 11% of my lot by my math. So again, if I looked at land value, that's a pretty big chunk. So sort of some interesting back of envelope. We always think of parking as free, but as you all as real estate gurus know better than anyone else, land ain't free, whether it's on the street, on a lot, built into a new commercial development, residential, like there's an opportunity cost to everything. And then in some cases, a maintenance cost and operating cost. For residential, I think we can just look at the land cost. So under the current zoning, I'm in SF2 with the new house. I was hoping for a more aggressive zoning category, but you know, it's the Austin real estate market in 2020. I overlooked that. So with the current zoning, I can only have one dwelling unit on the lot. I can turn the garage into living space, but I can't turn it into any like secondary unit. And I have to keep 2 parking spaces on the property at all times. Now, if the land code revision occurs that was previously drafted, I would then be allowed to have an ADU on my lot, and the garage would be the logical place and for my property. And I would only have to have 1 parking space required. So if anybody ever is like curious where that code language is, and if you want to see like, okay, what would happen to my current property if the land code revision happened and Project Connect is approved, like that's sort of the mental math I was working through when I was buying. And it's just interesting to know what's on the table, because I think over the next couple of years, a lot could start to change.
Hey, Lauren, real
Great.
quick, is that zoning because of the size of your lot? Or how does, as Brianna was asking, is there no ADU
yeah.
because it's under the minimum?
No, well, I think that my lot is just over the size that I typically had thought I could build an ADU, so I expected they would say yes. But it is due to just the zoning.
Okay.
So this SF2 zoning is pretty conservative in what you can do with the property. So I'm not sure what the zoning is on all of your properties, but based on where some of you live, I think you may be in like SF3, or I don't know if there's a 4, but you probably have slightly looser restrictions. This is on the conservative side. And I'm not totally fluent in all, like, I feel like some of you on the phone are probably really familiar with Austin's ADU ordinances, but I know in my case, it was just this SF2 zoning that restricted it for me. Oh, we have some SF3 in the house. I'm so jealous. So jealous. So anywho, that was sort of an interesting like experiment for me when I was buying this. And it's interesting that something I don't need is going to take up so much of my property and so much of my lot. And obviously I'll make the best of it, because we're all scrappy, financial gurus on this call. But hopefully in the long term, I'll have the option to turn this into an apartment if I want to. Okay, and then I want to mention one other thing that is going on. This affects bigger developments than what I think most of you are touching, but there's probably a lot of empires getting built on this call, so I don't want to assume. But previously, as part of the land code revision, they were going to include a lot of new transportation kind of amenities built in with new development. We call it transportation demand management. And so that was all part of the like land code revision. And the idea behind it is that as Austin grows, if we keep, particularly for large developments, if we keep telling them, no, just build a ton of parking and it'll be fine, we're going to end up in a pretty bad situation. So the idea with a TDM ordinance, Transportation Demand Management, TDM, is to, instead of requiring parking, require some other things also, or instead of, to better match what we need to do to get to that mode split goals that I showed you earlier. So this is usually like part of a development ordinance or a land use code. And the idea is that they're trying to really look at like how the trips that large development is going to create, how that's going to interface with traffic, and how parking fits in. So sometimes it's in lieu of building new parking. The ordinance could say you can build half as much parking if you do these other things, or sometimes it requires both. It's very city by city. But in Austin's case, it was going to be a piece of that code revision, and it did have some parking language in it, like a large shopping center or a large office might need to charge for parking or things like that to help reduce its demand. So the exact formation of that is a little bit in flux right now, but it applies to pretty large development, like nothing even in the mid-size. And it applies to all kinds of development. So with the parking code revision the land code revision getting stalled out, they are pulling it out of it because they see this piece as critical. Discussions around what's going to, like rezoning is a big deal. It's getting kind of weighted down with a lot of controversy, but they need to get as much done as they can on the mobility front to keep Austin like literally moving. So this and some other pieces of that big rewrite, the transportation related things, are pulled out. And those are some things that I helped with. So I know a little bit about how those are evolving, and they're probably going to be approved later this fall or winter. They're moving pretty quickly. So that's kind of neat, just from a perspective of like, you know, in several years, as new development occurs, large new development, maybe your future employer, if we're not all financially independent by then, will have like, you know, nice bike racks for you, or instead of giving you a free parking space, they'll give you a free transit pass. So that's kind of the gist of these TDM policies. And let me know if you have any questions about how those work. But that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle here I wanted to mention, because it doesn't affect probably our choices, but it's a priority area, akin to all of the other ones that we mentioned. Because as you all know, there is going to continue to be a lot of new development in Austin. And so they're trying to bake in multimodal options into our fabric of our city. So that is kind of the highlight reel of what I wanted to cover. So much is happening, yet not, you know, we're not sure if it's going to happen. So it's a really funny time to be a city planner, or a transportation planner, or a resident in Austin, because really our whole future is up for consideration. And that's really starting with the ballot in November and the Project Connect vote. And that is like November 3rd is really a watershed moment for Austin transportation history. And then all of the other pieces I mentioned, the baking in more multimodal options into new development, the parking code things, the land use changes that would really affect how dense Austin can be and who can live close to what. All of that is like just brewing in the background and making a lot of progress, but I feel like we're all kind of waiting for the rubber to hit the road on a lot of this. So 2020 is a huge year despite the pandemic, and I suspect after we see things unfold on November 3rd, some of the other pieces will either need to hurry up or stay on kind of a moderate pace track. But I don't see any of these conversations going away, even if things don't go the way of Project Connect on Election Day. I think it would be really hard for them to come up with a plan B, but I know they will, because they'll have to make some progress of some kind, because I think with population doubling by 2040 from 2 million to 4 million in the region, they are super worried about how that will work with our existing infrastructure. So none of these conversations are going away. A lot of them you've been hearing about for years, since 2000 for the transit ballots. But they're all coalescing, and I would say Project Connect is really the centerpiece, because as you all know, like transportation options are an essential piece of the puzzle. Like we can't take a train line that doesn't exist. And infrastructure shapes everything. Like it affects how the city will look and feel, where housing should be or could be, and the types of investment choices that we all may want to make as well. So you can kind of think of that as like the bones, and then everything else is meant to kind of work together and help support that. In the case of the land use code, densifying development so that there's a lot of riders in the right place and that system is really well used is a big feature. So those transit station areas are going to be a big focus. And then for the other kind of more policy-oriented items, those are meant to affect other new developments slowly, and just try to slowly layer in more options so that somebody who wants to try a different way of getting around feels like it's not an impossible battle, which it kind of does right now. I'm a crazy person for being able to not have to drive every day, but I am fully aware that that is a lot of luck and flexibility that almost nobody else has in their life, depending on their job, their family situation, just everything. So I kind of wanted to just sum up, and then I am super curious to hear from all of you about like how all of these changes affect how you might get around, what you're thinking like with your current properties, if you would change anything based on it, how it might change your personal finances, and then generally how you think it would affect your investment outlook. So I'll end there, and I will also kind of queue up the Project Connect map and post it in the chat as well, in addition to all the fabulous links that Jen posted, so that you all have those, and later on can like crosswalk to all of your homes and properties and start to think about it.
Oh, thank you. It looks like Christina had a question. If it doesn't pass, do you think they'll do a rapid or a rail line?
You know, I haven't been privy to their plan B. I think they've been a little bit like closed, keeping their hands closed on that, because we don't even want to think about it, what has to happen. But I know they have plan Bs. I'm not sure which pieces it would include, but I will say that during the like alternative selection process, they considered a lot. And some of those were like bus rapid transit. So it'd be something that looks and feels like light rail, has its own dedicated lane, the stops are high, and kind of has this comfort factor for boarding and unboarding. I could see them going in that direction. But it'll be interesting. I mean, the way that transit capital investment works is that you can get a lot of money out of the federal government, but you have to pony up too. Like they won't, they require a pretty strong local match. So I'm not sure how their federal strategy would change if it doesn't pass, if they would still be able to get a lot of support if they did the downgraded version. But I do think they would really, if you see where they're putting the light rail lines, like the orange line and the blue line, those are definitely identified as really critical corridors for mobility. So I would guess that they would really double down on those, is my my hunch.
Really. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I saw Brianna's question. Has COVID and the shift to remote work changed the thinking about expected commutes, housing trends, etc.? Yeah, so it has. I mean, I'm kind of a practical person. At the beginning of the pandemic, all of the people in my field were like, we need to really like change everything we're doing about transportation because of the pandemic. And I was like, you know, you guys are silly. This will be over in a few months. You know, all of the things we're doing are long-term, like multi-generational decisions. We should just stay the course. But now that it's gone on so long, it's turned into this grand experiment in a lot of ways. And I'm sure you all have seen, like, you know, traffic is not as bad as it used to be. A lot of our friends are, you know, becoming like digital nomads and relocating temporarily or permanently. We're seeing in a lot of regions, demand is increasing outside of urban cores. So like in the Bay Area, for example, prices are, residential prices are dropping, which didn't happen for the first tech boom or the second or the 08 crisis. So like this is epic that that's happening, and demand is spiking, residential demand outside of the city. So like in Marin County and kind of slightly more rural places. So it's changing a lot about the real estate market. I think you all are the expert on if it's changing the real estate market in Austin beyond the hyper competition. And then on the commute front, yeah, so with work from home being such a big deal, and then unemployment, I mean, a lot of people just don't have a job to travel to, therefore aren't creating trips right now. obviously that's reduced traffic in most regions. That has been crawling back pretty steadily though. So I think that it'll probably stay on a steady climb back. And then we're really curious about what happens. Like, will people be too nervous to take transit for a little while until there's like a vaccine? You could model out that if more people drive alone because they feel safer, that may offset some of the reductions from people working from home or, unfortunately, the unemployment rate. So I'm kind of, when I'm advising my clients, like other cities, I'm advising them to prepare for increased congestion and that challenge. But a lot of these bigger decisions we have to make are longer term. My favorite Twitter like war over Project Connect was somebody saying like, this is ridiculous to be investing in transit. There's a pandemic. You know, people don't want to get on transit right now. Like, what are you doing? And my colleague, you know, she's a sharp-witted gal. She replied back, well, you don't want to drink when you're hungover, but you do eventually. So that's kind of my metaphor for like the decision about funding transit during a unique period of time where interest has been growing in more people like demand for transit has been growing in ridership. Is Austin's ridership and transit was a real success story before the pandemic. And obviously now we're in a year or two when people don't really want to get on the bus because of the virus. But I don't see that lasting very long. So I think it'll be like anything once there's a vaccine, you know, and people get back to work, like the demand for transit is going to be pretty astronomical, kind of picking up from where it left off. That's how I see the pandemic affecting transportation.
Yeah, all super helpful. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? I love hearing, yeah, like I said, I sound so naive, but like considering public transportation isn't even something I would have thought of with an investment strategy, but kind of hearing this and like looking at where are the hubs and not just like what's walkable, but where do other people want to be is so interesting, such a fascinating, like different facet of it, which is, yeah.
Yeah, and I can share on my screen the Project Connect map if that's helpful. It's a little bit higher quality when it's in PDF form for folks to be able to see. Can you see the map okay, folks?
Yeah, it's still a little small, but I think we can also include this in
Okay.
I'll send out a recap email to everyone tomorrow and we can include this.
Awesome. Yeah, as I said earlier, I mean, the colors to look for when you do look at the map, like look at the orange line in particular and the blue line, because those are identified as really the highest priority. But this initial investment, as you can see, includes a bunch of other stuff as well, including all the purple lines are rapid bus routes. That'll get quite a bit better. So this gives you an idea of what is likely to happen. I'll say from a like timeline perspective. So let's say if it did pass in November, I think they were aiming to start construction in 4 years. And I think that they're trying to desperately like wrap it up as fast as they can within a decade. So it's quite a few years out, but I'm sure like a lot of you are making your real estate decisions pretty long term. So you could imagine like a period of construction, really going line by line. They're super aware of construction impacts on commercial corridors in particular. So they have a pretty sophisticated construction preliminary idea of how they would go through it. But it would happen, it seems like a long time, like that some pieces of this won't be up and running for a few years, and then all of this not for maybe a decade. But in the grand scheme of what it takes to get like major infrastructure projects done, it's actually really, really speedy. So yeah, we really kind of plan for the next generation in public transit, but this is a case where these improvements would actually impact all of us a lot sooner than that too.
Very cool. Let's see, Brianna said, speaking of bike lanes, is there info on plans for expansion in those in Project Connect?
Yeah, so This was actually a big debate because as you kind of long timers have seen, like there were a few years where there were a lot of new bike lanes built, and then it felt like it kind of stalled out. And so that was a really big question for this fall, is like how much to include. This is transit's year to try to get organized, but the end conclusion, and I think Councilman Jimmy Flanagan was kind of the champion for this, was that this really needs to be a full mobility package, not only transit. So it actually does include some funding for both sidewalks and bike infrastructure. But I don't know that they've identified the locations for those. I could be totally wrong, but it is meant to be a full multimodal package with Project Connect as the centerpiece, but really every mode represented and to some degree.
Awesome. Kathleen, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, okay. So it was just a little long to type. So as far as you touched on a little bit affordable housing, and to me, I feel like affordable housing is not what they're building on the east side, even though that's kind of what they said that would happen. To me, affordable housing is like under 300, under 200. And a lot of that, right, is on the outskirts, mainly on way east, way north, way south. And I feel like there's a lot of people who live in that affordable housing, even all the way to maybe Kyle. And it's like, you know, okay, if we're going to be more relaxed on parking restrictions, what about these people who have to drive all the way in from Kyle or wherever else, you know, to get to work near downtown? I guess that's my, you know, do you think it'll be extended farther, or is Austin just too small for something like the BART system in San Francisco? Like kind of what I'm referring to, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There was a lot of debate about how to make this more regional as they're setting things up. And you all can, who have been around town longer, can correct me, like who were tracking the last, like the 2014 one, but I think that was a pretty big criticism of it if what I overhear is correct, that they felt like it wasn't looking regional enough. And so as you can see, this plan is really, you know, serving Austin, but they considered the region to a great extent when they set it up. So they kind of call this like the foundational piece to get going, and the alignment and kind of long-term view is meant to extend more regionally than is in the current map. But it does push on it further than it is today in the investment map, but that's a very real consideration. And I really honestly don't have like the full download on how those financial models have worked out and like which cities outside of Austin wanted to play ball. Like last year, Leander was about to say goodbye to Cap Metro, even though it gets a very good financial deal. So there's all kinds of like regional politics that play into that. And I think from what I hear, there might have been a few roadblocks, but Cap Metro is dead set on kind of at least getting things set up so it can be a much more regional system. And then you mentioned like these hurdles that we all have, like not everybody can do the same thing, especially with how, you know, like you said, the dispersal like of the last remnants of affordability getting pushed further and further out, which is very real. And I don't think there's actually a perfect answer. I think so many, like all of the things we talked about today, like the land use stuff, the transit stuff, the parking stuff, it's all very chicken and egg. I mean, if on the housing front, I am pretty appalled at like how like just across US cities, our lack of housing policy has completely bit us in the butt. Like it's not just Austin. And the gentrification cycle is like, it's just moving like a freight train, and it used to be just a few cities, and now it seems like the majority of cities. So, I mean, that's real. And in terms of what'll address it, you know, I think with the land code revision, they're really putting their stake in the ground and saying that we need to do other things. We need more affordable housing programs, but if we don't increase the supply by loosening restrictions on residential properties and what you can do with your property, there's no way we can catch up. There's like the supply side issue is so real. Like you picture the affordability level today, and then you picture if we kept our pretty built out city, like the code restriction exactly the same, and then add 2 million more people, like the affordability challenges will get even worse. So I don't think there's a magic answer to any of it at all, to be honest with you. And on the parking side of the front, I always just try to remind people that loosening the restrictions doesn't mean that you can't do something. Like if we go from Celeste, you need to have 2 parking spaces on your property at all times, to saying, Celeste, there's not a requirement. You can do what you want with it. You can put less or more. It doesn't. We're basically just removing the restriction that you always have to. Like we're removing the default to parking piece of the puzzle. And then there is talk of parking maximums, but that is, I believe that's only in the downtown core, where I don't know if you've seen some of the new like skyscrapers coming up, but as a city planner, when I see a new skyscraper and I see 60% of the floor area going to parking decks, and then I see like homeless people around the corner and see the affordability crisis and think about what else that space could be used for, that to me is a pretty big red flag that our land code has gone the wrong direction in terms of efficiency for more other uses. So yeah, but I think you're right. There's always going to be people who have to drive. That's the reality of like where your job is. Is it regional? Is it all of that? So I think the idea here needs to be to just create more options and create incentives, but not restrict or expect everybody to have the same lifestyle. That's just not realistic.
What is the difference between a metro rail and a light rail? Not a dumb question. I don't know either.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'd want to double check to make sure I'm right, but I'm pretty sure what it means is they've called like metro rail, the red line, they've called because it's more regional. So that's the line that goes out to Leander. So my hunch is that the nomenclature may be focused on like ones that are considered more regional, like the red line.
Okay, very cool. Any other questions, y'all? I included the link to this map that she's sharing in the chat, and like I said, I'll do it in the recap email as well. But yeah, I think for myself, I just learned a ton. This was so helpful. Thank you very much, Lauren.
Awesome. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to hit me up in the Facebook group as well. I like talking about this stuff. So I think I must have done an okay job choosing my job. But I'm so excited to hear like how this affects all of your properties and decisions too. I'm still kind of mentally processing that for myself and my recent purchase, and we're all going to be part of a pretty changing city, so it's a lot to keep track of. And if you're interested in like kind of more of the details of Project Connect, I definitely suggest like looking at the map. There's actual representatives of the project who know everything about it, who it's their job to go talk to people about it, like groups, and they'll kind of give you the really detailed system version. So if anybody's like part of a group and just like needs more info on it, hit me up and I can connect you with the people who can do like a more nitty-gritty presentation on what all of it means for the transportation options. So.
Emily said, where would you buy next?
I really wanted to buy something in Crestview with like a huge lot, and then, 10 years from now, be a self-developer and have split the lot. And as you know from knowing a little bit about me, I would have been like, yeah, we're going to get rid of this parking. We're going to create more units, more people can live near transit, that was like my fantasy. So once I get settled, yeah. So maybe I'll be looking for a partner, I think you guys use the word partners in this group. In the future, once I get settled, maybe I'll like keep my eyes loosely on some of the lines that I talked about, like the orange line and the blue line, to see if something popped up as my next property.
I like it. I like it. Perfect. All right. Well, I will let everyone get on with their nights. But thank you all so much for being here. I learned so much. Thank Lauren. Really appreciate your time and effort in being with us tonight. And yeah, this will be recorded. So if you want to refer back to it, we'll have it posted, and I'll share that link in the email tomorrow. But thank you all for being here. It was such a good group. I'm glad everyone was here. And make sure you join our Facebook group. That link will also be in the email tomorrow if you're not a part of it, so we can kind of keep the conversation going throughout in between meets. As always, if you have a suggestion for a speaker or a topic you want to hear more about, email me, Facebook group it. We want to hear it. We want to give you what the people want. So yeah, thank you again. I hope you all have a good night, and we'll talk later.
Thanks, Celeste. Bye, everybody.
And